Fun fact, every article of clothing you see on this stage right now is handmade. Before you ask, no, I don't sell on Etsy. I have degrees and a day job in geoscience, but I've carried on the craft of dressmaking and garment construction to stay sane while becoming a geoscientist. I started making clothes at about 9 or 10 years old with my grandmothers. And I had a pretty short attention span for the overly complicated patterns I chose, so they usually ended up finishing things for me. You gotta start somewhere, right? Once I grew old enough to start actively participating, much of my time was spent attempting and usually failing to read patterns for every kind of garment imaginable. Now, for those who haven't done garment construction, it starts with a pattern, half-decent spatial reasoning skills, and patience. For example, let's look at this piece here. What on earth is that supposed to be, right? It can get really challenging keeping track of it all, especially when you've got all these patterns and failed attempts mothballed in your craft room. Not that I know anything about that. For me, the instructions are especially difficult to read. And depending on the brand of pattern you buy, some even skip steps because they assume you already know how to do something. Yikes. That is one hell of a status quo to navigate, especially when you're just starting out. Now, I've always been impatient and ambitious, so I wasn't about to give up, but it's fair to say it was a rocky start. Dressmaking continued as a love-hate hobby into my teens. I would read the pattern, get frustrated, and then ask an age-old question that the authority figures in my life are all too familiar with. It goes a little something like this. Why? And it usually came about whenever I thought I could do something better than the high and mighty instructions suggested. Like, what was some pattern going to tell me about what size something should be, right? Well, granted, most of the time I would be wrong and grumble and rip out seams for the next few hours. But other times, especially when I matured and started filling out, I was totally right. Following standard pattern sizing produced square, frumpy clothes. Now, at the time, I didn't know what a multi-dimensional being I would become today, but I sure as hell knew I wasn't a square and I wasn't a frump. Now, teenage years are important for establishing ideas of body image, so when even custom clothes wouldn't fit, I could either give up and be unhappy with the way all of my clothes fit, or I could make a change. My form of rebellion was finding liberation in taking in the waistline and flaring out the hips because I was taking control of the pattern to better fit me. Now, it was a step in the right direction on my quest for the perfect fit, but looking back, I did the best I could with the time and the knowledge and the skills that I had, but I was complacent and I was bored, and it showed. I quickly learned that spite and oddly manifesting rebellion can only get you so far, and life will change everything on you whenever it wants to. One day, a little over 3 years ago, I underwent one of these significant life changes. I won't go into detail, but I will say it took strength to endure as it was happening, and it took tremendous courage to deal with the aftermath. In an instant, my life became as unclear and convoluted as pattern instructions. I was angry and confused and resentful. Emptiness and numbness are symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder, commonly known as PTSD, and both hit me like a train. Incapable of feeling or processing subconscious feelings, I felt as if my artistic inspiration had been stolen from me. I didn't want to create. I didn't even want to look at myself. Body image became a complex topic at this point because I was glad to have control over my body again, but the choices I made with that control were not driven by self-love. If you can't close your eyes and say, I love myself, then how can you ever look at your whole self in the mirror and say it? Instead, I asked, who the hell am I anyway? And why would I expend precious time and energy making clothes for someone I didn't know or like? There was no pattern for this, no norm, no status quo. I was in free fall, too exhausted and depressed to even try catching myself. While the numbness persisted and my priorities shifted to establishing personal safety, My sewing machine and my better judgment remained silent. Now, fast forward about 3 months, the healing process had started, but I had a particularly no good, very bad day, and my mind was threatening to go numb as raw feelings came spilling out all over again. But this time, instead of going numb, I sat with my feelings and I held on to them just long enough to process them in a way that produced something tangible. I began to draw. Now, starting a design from scratch meant that there were no rules, no constraints, just me, the measurements, and the machine. I finally allowed myself to reject the status quo altogether and reject my pre-existing ideas of skill limitations and body image and so forth. And within minutes, in this haze of hyperfocus, my hobby, that originated out of rebellion and spite, evolved into an art form where nobody else's preconceived notions were allowed. A new body image took shape where every curve and every measurement was there to be celebrated and cherished. I consider this to be one of the most raw and transcendent moments of my life because my identity had been allowed to punch through the noise and make itself known. Everything became possible at that moment when I said screw it and drew what had been at the time my most original and most ambitious design yet. I brought it with me here today. Everyone, this was me in a dress. William Wordsworth described poetry as the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. This means that when emotions become overwhelming and awe-inspiring, they spill out of you in a beautiful way. I believe this is what happens every time I create because my expression is rooted in such a cathartic experience. It rests on the fine line between the primal and the spiritual. Artistic expression allows you to produce a tangible extension of yourself that can be seen and heard and smelled and felt. And so when someone asks, "Who are you?" you can look back and say, "This is me." Even you can ask, "Who am I?" and have something that reminds you of who you are. Therefore, I encourage you to make the most of these spontaneous emotional waterfalls and create something, regardless of your skill level. Now keep in mind, your art may change over time because you change over time. But if you keep creating, you'll always have a record of you and your growth. For example, in many ways, I'm grateful to be giving this talk in 2021 rather than 2020 because since then, I'm able to extend this growth notion into gender identity and neurodivergence. The autistic, non-binary goddess and this epic, sparkly triumph stemmed from the angry, edgy, hot mess in that little black dress. Monitoring growth like this is important for any venture, be it art or weight loss or healing from emotional trauma, etc. It even extends into science. Yes, science. Ever had a eureka moment where thoughts and ideas and concepts and relationships suddenly click? Or days where the words of the paper you're writing just spill out of you? These spontaneous overflows of information build into repertoires that allow you to track your career throughout the decades. Research and contributing unique ideas to the scientific community is an art form that can be learned and developed and improved upon and explored just like dressmaking and emotional healing. Scientists can access the same creative hyperfocus that artists and writers and musicians can because it's all deeply rooted in being human. Now, another thought. In working to develop yourself in any way you like, you can involve any amount of status quo you want. You can closely follow pre-existing ideas and patterns if you're just starting out, or you can jump off the deep end, like I did, or you can work anywhere in between, as long as you're staying true to yourself. Now, to illustrate this, I'll be diving off another deep end here soon as I develop the latest iteration of myself in the form of my wedding dress. Now, the most common reaction I get when I tell people I'm making my wedding dress is, "Oh, that sounds stressful." But what these people don't realize is that for me, it's less stressful than trying on dresses and finding all the ways I can misrepresent myself. And this will be the most important dress I ever make because it'll be the way I present the most authentic version of myself to the person who wouldn't want anything less. I'm sorry, I just get so emotional because it means so much to me. And that's the beauty of it. This is the way I can maintain my voice in a process that's so unoriginal and commercialized. Your outlet can be the way you discover your voice. It can be the way you hold on to your voice. Now, I'd like to leave you all with a little reminder that I hope helps in case darkness ever seeps into your life. Yes, you have to own your trauma. It hurts and it's difficult and it sucks, but you can also own the self-expression that arises from it. You can own your quest for identity. Know that your artistic inspiration is rooted so deep that it's always a place you can restart from with a clean canvas. Your moldable, changeable pattern is customized for you because it has never been created before. So whenever you feel the most alone in the noise of opinions, listen to that inner feeling and let it articulate in whatever manner feels most natural. This is the essence of you. Dream it, dance it, draw it, stitch it, paint it, heal. Make it happen.